Hello and good evening. I hope everybody's safe and well out there. It's that time again on a Monday night for another one of our Q&A live streaming sessions. I'm very pleased tonight to be joined by Dan Smith from the field team. Good evening, Dan.
Good evening, Sam. How you doing?
I'm good. And how are you today?
Always buzzing, Sam, every day. You know, you're always smiling, so all good, my friend.
No, it's always. I think we started to have a conversation which we probably could have gone on and on. It's like, I think it's a thing. You get a few electricians in the room and that's it. They could talk all night. You don't need to throw in any new subjects. There's always plenty of old ones that can still be talked about. So that's good. Okay. Well, without further ado, we'll have a look at the question of the week that's been posted around. So let's just remind our viewers and ourselves of the question. So the question was, if it's not practical to run a bonding conductor to an extraneous conductive part, is it acceptable to box in the extraneous conductive part to make it inaccessible? So I guess we're looking at situations where, for one reason or another, maybe the extraneous conductive part is at one end of the property and the service cut out and main earth terminal are at the other end, and it's been overlooked for whatever reason. We might have a situation where it's not really practical to be able to run a bonding conductor, but we've got an identified extraneous conductive part. What are your thoughts then, Dan? First of all, because we had quite a mixed message on some of our social media channels about people feeling very strongly that this couldn't be done. So what's our thoughts? What's the Searchall view on this?
Okay, so we always have a good debate, don't we, Sam? So it's always good to get these one buttoned up. First of all, let's just look what the definition of an extraneous conductive part is. Obviously, it's a conductive part which is liable to introduce a potential, generally earth potential, and does not form part of electrical insulation. So you really think about this. So if it can't introduce potential, then it's no longer liable to do so. So therefore, we're no longer by definition extraneous, and therefore not need bonding. But so the answer to that is yes, you can opt to do this. You can box it, you can make it inaccessible, and that is one method that is often talked about on assessments. Like with myself, sometimes we may see a extraneous part which is nearby other items of exposed work, etc., which is accessible to touch, but for whatever reason they can't run a suitable size bonding conductor over. So the conversation often leads to, or can you make it inaccessible? You can't say that you can't touch it, because by boxing it in, what you're actually doing, you're actually removing the risk of electric shock. So, however, if you do that, I can just say for consideration also is just make sure that it's not accessible anywhere else within the installation itself. So therefore, like anything we do, always carry out some form of an assessment of the actual extraneous conductive part in question, and obviously then assess it from there really. Again, I think with this one as well, we box it in, it's commonly seen, I've seen it many times, nothing wrong with it at all. But again, before I even go down the boxing route, I'd obviously first want to verify, is it extraneous? Because obviously there are a few tests that we can do, Sam, as you know, based on the resistance of the actual steelwork to the main earth terminal. You'd often hear the values of 22,000 ohms plus 1,000 ohm body resistance, or even 7,670 ohms, when you've got 30 milliamps. Again, and a lot of these refer to, there's a British Standard publication entitled The Effects of Current on the Human Beings and Livestock under the 60479 series, which is where these current levels come from. So such as referring to the let go of threshold current as 10 milliamps. Again, this is where your 22 plus 1k comes involved, So yeah, so first check it, is it extraneous, what's the resistance? And if it is, can you bond it, obviously, or does it need to be bonded? Is there anything nearby that that it's going to introduce potential across? And again, if it is, one option is to box it in again. And so, yeah, that is definitely a yes. So that would be our stance, Sam.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And like you say, it really comes from the definition, and the definition says it's a conductive part liable to introduce a potential, and if it can't be touched, it can't introduce a potential to persons or livestock. So yeah, and there's a few. If we'll just show the definition again. So the definition says that in order for it to be an extraneous conductive part, it has to meet all of those parts. So it has to be liable to introduce, it has to be conductive, and it doesn't form part of the electrical installation. So it will still be conductive, it will still not be part of the installation, but it won't be liable to introduce, because we've now made it inaccessible. The other thing to say is that there's plenty of guidance around. So we've got pocket guides and connections articles. There's also, it's mentioned in IET Guidance Note 8, Earthing and Bonding, about the fact that if it's not accessible, then it doesn't need to be considered an extraneous conductive part. So yeah, plenty of guidance to back up what we've said about the fact that, you know, you don't need to consider it an extraneous conductive part if you can box it in.
Yeah, there's good reference to that, Sam, as you've said already. Pocket guide number 41, everyone, which is available on the customer portal. If you go into the dashboard, technical support and then technical guidance, you find the pocket guides in there, and that will again refer to that being boxed in as well. And as Sam said as well, in our connections magazines, also available on the customer portal under, again, technical support section. It was the autumn 2014 on page 46 edition, which covers this as well. So, and NIC have done numerous other articles about extraneous conductive parts and you know, how, you know, about, you know, whether, you know, is it accessible. So
yeah. Okay, we'll pick up another one that was a follow-on question from a couple of weeks ago when we did one of the webinars on testing, and this question is about ZS values. So the question is, when recording maximum permitted ZS values, should I record the 100% values from BS7671 or the 80% calculated values? So this is in that column which specifically said maximum permitted ZS values in accordance with 7671. What's our view on that, Dan?
So I get this a lot on when reviewing certification reports on assessments. It's something that I often pull up, but not for being wrong or incorrect. It's more because people often refer to other values that aren't in the BS771, and the cert's actually asking you for the maximum permitted, i.e. the tabulated values. However, you can use other values, but you should state the source of information or where you obtain those values from. So again, the 8% values, or the maximum measured, as also known, they're more, you know, we're referring to the maximum permissible values for design purposes, operating conductor temperatures, etc. So, but yeah, again, so the value, you know, you should record is the 100% values, but you can record other values. But really, the best place to go, though, which is often overlooked, is directly from the manufacturer, because, you know, they're the ones that's made the device. You know, they're going to have the most accurate data. So again, if you can, and it's available, I know there's many manufacturers out there which do fantastic detailed tables, even of MCCVs in every single setting of an MCCV, and what the max ZS values are for that as well. So again, there's some really good guidance out there as well, Sam, that you can follow, that you could choose as well. Yeah,
and I think that's spot on. You know, I think we learn from an early age, and then we get familiar with recording the values out of chapter 41. But in fact, 7671 itself in Appendix 3 says that it's actually preferable to get the manufacturer's data, and only when you can't get the manufacturer's data, then use the values in chapter 41 as an alternative. So yeah, spot on. So yeah, it was just you know, we should record the 100% values. We should record our actual measured values or our calculated values. The 80% comes in when we're doing our comparison of measured or calculated value against the maximum, and that's to compensate for the temperature difference between the two sets of figures.
There is a really good article specifically relating to comparing, or that explains the difference between the maximum permitted and the maximum measured. Again, I want to plug it again, the customer portal. Again, if you haven't been on it already, a fantastic source of CPD which you can use, and it was in the Connections Winter 2009 edition on page 55, and it's entitled Maximum Permitted and Maximum Measured Values of Earth fault impedance. So again, it's a point of reference there.
Spot on. Well, just drop back to, because we've got a question I think that's related to the first one. Generally, do we work to 22k ohms or 7k ohms for determining the extraneous conductive part? When would we choose which one would be used, and can you give examples? So if I start off, what I would say is that we first of all need to define what we believe would be our tolerable level of fault current, and if we're going for a tolerable level of fault current of 10 milliamps, then that's where we're getting our 22k value from. If we increase that to 30 milliamps, that's where we'd get our 7k or 6.7k value from. So if, for example, all of your final circuits were 30 milliamp protected, RCD 30 milliamp RCD protected, you may consider 30 milliamp. Although there is a school of thought that says you've got to think about some of those locations, like the bathroom, where you're going to be more susceptible due to a decreased body resistance because you're unclothed and you're wet. So yeah, it's really down to the designer, based on knowledge of the installation and its users, as to which value of fault current you're going to use to determine your extraneous conductive parts. Would you add anything to that, Dan?
Yeah, no, spot on. Again, it all comes down to, as the designer, are you determining the fault current level as parts of the human body as 10 milliamps or as 30 milliamps? I've always gone by the old ECA, which was documented many years ago, of the 22,000 ohms plus 1,000 ohm body resistance, giving you 23,000 ohms, obviously, which obviously gives a maximum of 10 milliamps if you let go of threshold current. However, if the installation is fully RCD protected with 30 milliamp RCDs, then you could consider the 7.67 kilo ohm value of maximum resistance. But for me, I've always been a bit cautious of using that, Sam, because I always worry about what if somebody connects a circuit on there that ain't going to be then on a 30 milliamp RCD at a later date. But it's just a personal thing. But again, it is, as Sam said, you're the designer, it's just something you can consider. So are circuits RCD protected, or is there a risk or a high risk that they're not all going to be? And then you might want to refer to the other value of 22k plus 1,000 ohms for the body resistance. Yeah,
and it's always a consideration, isn't it? The lower you perceive that threshold of fault current, then the safer it's going to be for the users of the installation. So if you take the 10 milliamp figure related to the 22k figure, then that's going to be a little bit safer than using the 30 milliamp figure with the 6.7. So I'm aware of some people that even use 5 milliamps, so they go even lower still.
Yeah.
So yeah, it really is down to you as the designer, taking into consideration the installation and its use. Sticking with bonding tonight, so when I'm using supplementary protective equipotential bonding, do I need to connect it to the installation's main earth terminal? So now I've got a location where I'm applying supplementary equipotential bonding. Do I need to take that back to the MET?
No, this is a different form now. So this is now an additional protective measure that's often commonly seen, as I'm sure many viewers have seen, in special locations, purely because there's a greater perceived risk of electric shock. And you can see it again in bathrooms, in swimming pools, agricultural, horticultural premises, medical locations as well. And it purely interconnects between all simultaneously accessible exposed conductive parts of fixed equipment and extraneous conductive parts. I say it's purely there because it's in a special location, because, as I say, there is a greater perceived risk of electric shock. So no, it doesn't need to be connected to the MET.
Yeah, the way that I've always viewed it is when we're doing supplementary bonding, it's like we're creating a local equipotential bond. So we're only interested in that physical area, say the bathroom or the swimming pool. We're not interested in the whole installation. So that's why it doesn't need to go back to the MET. So it's just that localised area that we're trying to ensure we've got a strong equipotential zoning. Another quick one that we often see. Do I need to put green and yellow sleeving on the flying lead of an RCBO before connecting it to the earth bar in a consumer unit or a distribution board? So I've got an RCBO with an integral flying lead. The manufacturer tells me to connect that to the earth terminal. Do I need to green and yellow sleeve that?
No, again, it's a functional earth now we're talking about, and there is actually a colour defined for the functional earth within the BS771, and it's found in table 51 for identification of conductors, which is on page 131 of the current 18th edition.
Yeah.
And it used the colour cream recognised for that particular purpose. Again, for RCBOs, it could be there to detect a loss supply neutral, for example. So again, it's got a functional purpose to it, and that's why it's really identifiable by its cream colour.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there's no need. It's not a protective conductor. It's a functional earth. Our advice is to install it in the same terminal as the circuit protective conductor for that circuit, so it's readily identified what its purpose is. But do be aware there are some RCBOs out there that don't have a functional earth, so it's not actually a requirement of the product standard for RCBOs to have one, but when we've got one, yes, follow manufacturer's instructions, but we don't need to green and yellow sleeve it because it's not a protective conductor. Sticking with our bonding, it seems to be a popular one. So in a large installation where the electrical supply enters at one end and the water service enters at the other end, can I use a structural steel as a protective conductor? So I think they're talking about perhaps rather than running a long bonding conductor the length of the building, can I bond to structural steel local to the extraneous conductive part and then bring that back to the MET through the structural steel itself? So what's our take on that one, Dan?
So yes, I see this a few times a year, to be fair, on assessment, Sam, again. Yes, you can, but there are some things to consider. Obviously, if you are going to do that, because it's impractical to run that bonding conductor all the way the other side of the factory, for example. Obviously, carry out a visual inspection and verification measurements as well to verify that it is continuous and it hasn't sort of separated at some point all the way. But often, as I say, if it's continuous all the way, you measured it, it's nice and low. It's often creates a fantastic MET because if you look at the copper equivalents, you generally rate it around 8 or 8.5 ratio to copper. So if you've got a steel 8 times larger than copper equivalent as copper, then obviously you've actually got quite a good bonding conductor. You're actually probably running a larger bonding conductor than what you would normally by using the structural steel, because the CSA of the structural steel is so large. It's obviously embedded in the general mass of Earth at multiple points again for the ground. So it's generally got a very, very good reference to Earth. So
yeah,
yes, you can.
Yeah, I've seen it done a lot because the structural steel is going to be there. There are a couple of regs. So there's one reg which tells us what we can use as a protective conductor, and that confirms we can use an extraneous conductive part, which the structural steel will tend to be, providing it complies with a 2.6 reg, which is on the same page further down, and that just talks about we can use an extraneous conductive part so long as it's not the oil pipe or the gas pipe, or it's not an extraneous conductive part that's got stress, and then it has to be durable. So we wouldn't suggest using a service pipe, water for example, because that could be removed by the service provider. However, it's estimated that the structural steel will be there to stay unless they make some serious alterations to the structure of the building. So it's almost like we're considering that the structural steel is more reliable as a conductor, which is going to be maintained, and therefore, like you say, as long as we've done our homework visually and through measurement verified that it is adequate as a conductor, then yeah, there's no problem in using it. Obviously, we'd need to label up our connections at each point to make people aware that it's a safety electrical connection for them not to remove. Okay, so we'll start to take some more of the live questions. There's a gentleman that said that he's talked about his application. If you don't mind, we'll try and pick that one up separately. We'll try and keep the Monday night to technical, but I've got your name now, and I will keep your question in hand, so we will come back to you. The next one that appears is hi, recent EICR, SWA to a subboard, the SWA outer sheath, the armour and the inner sheath stripped in the stud wall behind the consumer unit, with just conductors emerging through the plasterboard and into the rear of the consumer unit. What, if any, code? Difficult one without being there to see it, but I think you've got to really make a judgment call about the conductors. Just how far back can you see, because my concern always with, if somebody has roughly stripped off that armour, they might not have protected the inner conductors, so we might be seeing abrasion, in which case then we'd be looking at coding it. If it was done, it sounds a strange thing to say, if it was done to a high standard, because the description of work isn't a high standard. So yeah, I think you've got to look at, is there signs of abrasion? Could there possibly be? How well are those conductors supported? Are they likely to suffer abrasion? But always very difficult when we can't see the extent of it. But yeah, I think you've got to certainly got to be very careful on things like insulation resistance measurements. So can we see if there's any signs? Look at resistance end-to-end measurements to see if that continuity tells us anything. But yeah, a very difficult one to code. Obviously, if you're starting to see any of those errors, in certainly abrasion, then you'd be looking at coding it that it should be improved at least. And obviously, if you're starting to see insulation resistance issues, then that's a C2 in terms of if it is less than a meg, which is our 7671 value. But yeah, that would be one of those ones that you really need to have a look at and take a step back and say, okay, so it's not how I would have done it. It doesn't appear to be in line with 7671 in terms of proper materials and good workmanship, but is there a danger to the users of the installation? Would you add anything to that, Dan, other than we'd want to go and see it?
Yeah, I think, to be fair, I may have misread the question, because I was getting it. My concern was, when you had the question out, was that the arming's not earthed. So my question at the load end, is has it been earthed at the supply end? Because obviously the ship does need to be earthed, obviously. So that was how I was reading the question, but maybe I misinterpreted it. So in my head, I'm thinking, hang on, this could be an issue here, because obviously if the armour's not earthed at all at either end, then that does need doing. So, but I might have misread the questions out.
No, I think you're spot on. You've pulled that. That's absolutely correct. And we would say that it should be earthed, preferably at the supply end, so that if we do have any problems. So let's just read it again. EIC SWA to subboard, SWA outer sheath armour. So we're assuming, and that's dangerous, because again it'd be something that we'd want to confirm. We're assuming that it has been correctly glanded and terminated at the supply end, and it's only at the subboard that we've got these issues. But yeah, very good point. It has to be earthed. If it's not earthed, then we're potentially dangerous all day, because we'd see that as an exposed conductive part.
And also, Sam, sometimes it is impractical to actually earth it on the load end, because sometimes it comes rear inch on the board as well, and sometimes you just physically can't do it, which does happen. But I always make sure, is it earthed is the main thing, is that armoured, and obviously carry out that continuity measurement as well, between the armouring and the CPC inside, make sure that it is commonly connected.
Yeah. A general question, which I'm not sure we'll be able to answer, so but a good question, but it would open up a whole debate on itself. With the onset of RCDs, as they come into more installations, do you see bonding potentially being discontinued, like for example supplementary bonding has gone somewhat? So yeah, really valid point. We make it clear now in the regs, don't we, that in a typical domestic installation, where we've got adequate main equipotential bonding, we've got RCD protection, then there's no need for supplementary bonding, which is what we used to do in a bathroom before RCDs were introduced. So possibly, but however, there's still, in swimming pools, in medical locations, in those areas where again there's a greater perceived risk for whatever reason. So in swimming pools it's because we're wet. In medical locations it's we could be open skin, and so again the potential risk is increased. So those parts of the regs still employ supplementary bonding in addition to RCD protection. So I can see it's a consideration, but I think in some places again where the risks are at their highest, we're going to employ every additional protective measure that's perceived as required because of the enhanced risk. But a good question, good one for an open discussion.
I think as well, Sal, it depends on how much we like to rely on RCDs. Obviously, and RSPOs. I mean, obviously they're fantastic devices. They're great. But obviously, for me, the old bottom braces approach never fails. And I think I'm just of that mindset, bottom braces, and that's probably why. But the RCDs generally employed for additional measures. But again, it's hard to sort of speculate, and we never want to assume, do we? Because chances are we'll get it wrong.
Yeah.
So don't like to assume.
Yeah, and it's a valid point that if we go back 20 plus years to when RCDs were starting to be introduced, people felt a lot safer about a physical conductor providing the additional protection through supplementary bonding. But people have now taken fully on board the advantages of RCDs and their ease of installation, their ease of test. It could be a replacement long term, but I think there will always be some areas where it's considered that they want that belt and braces approach. Okay, if a swimming pool is outside and extraneous conductive parts are in the zones, then do the extraneous conductive parts need a main protective bond to them, and then supplementary bond linked from them to the grid or earth mat if PME is utilised? So yes, there's a recommendation within the swimming pool section 702 that if we've got PME requirements, then we need supplementary bonding for our between our exposed and extraneous conductive parts that are within the zones. So again, that's one of those examples where supplementary bonding is required in that local area because of the perceived enhanced risk associated with swimming pools. So body resistance at an all-time low because we're unclothed and wet. So yeah, there's a specific requirement still in section 702 for supplementary bonding of those items that are in the zones. Another one we've got: EV installation. Do I need pen fault detection, and what earthing arrangement for an EV point inside a garage with the vehicle being charged within the garage? Okay, so a few things to break out of that question. So EV installation, do I need pen fault detection? Well, not necessarily so. Basically, if we start from the origin, we talked about not exporting PME except under certain conditions, and those conditions have been enhanced with Amendment 1 to include OPEN devices. So we've now got some devices that will detect pen conductor failure and provide disconnection to provide safe. So they're only required where you've got a PME earthing system. If you've not got a PME earthing system, you don't need an OPEN device. And even with a PME earthing system, if, as the second part of your question says, the EV point is inside the garage and the vehicle is charged within the garage, then so long as we've correctly created that equipotential zone within the garage, again there's no need for an OPEN device. So it's only when the vehicle is likely to be charged outside. So not necessarily the charging point could be inside, but if you're charging the vehicle outside and it's a PME supply, then that's where we if we want to maintain the PME without installing a supplementary or reference earth electrode, if you can get it down low enough, then you would need the open device. But yeah, it's have a look at Appendix 1, which came out in February 2020, and it introduced those 3 new idents to cater for some of your other options on PME without having to convert it to TT.
Well, I'll add to that, Sam, as well, is if you are faced with that situation where it's going to be inside a garage, it's attached to the house, the car's going to be parked indoors, just also make a reference to the installation cert as well, to say that that's how it was intended to be used, that was how the design was employed. As if you're not going to employ any additional measures, just cover yourself, obviously. It's all about traceability and documenting out on the installation cert.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, because what you don't want to be caught out is then different users of that installation using that charging point differently. So yeah, make it clear what your design and installation has been based on. So again, that's in the extent of installation, nice and clear definition of why it's been designed and installed in that manner. Another one, what reference method would be recorded for PVC insulated and sheath flat cables with a CPC in mini trunking installed on a wall? So I think that would be reference method B. What reference method would be recorded for PVC insulated and sheath flat cable with CPC in mini trunking installed on a wall? Yeah, so because we've got conductors in trunking that's on a wall, I think we'd see that as reference method B. So if you were looking for current carrying capacity, unfortunately on table 45 for flat twin and earth cable, it doesn't have reference method A, so you have to go back to the standard multi-core 70 degrees C cable table, which does have reference methods A and B on it as well. Let's have a look. Can you explain thermal resistivity of soil rating factor and how to assess the ground and select the correct factor? Wow, I think we'd need a bit of time on that.
It's Monday, Sam. It's Monday. It's too early for this.
It'd be interesting, though, in terms of, are they thinking about transmission of fault currents, or are they thinking about the effect on any conductors installed within that? So yeah, we'd certainly like to come back to that. So yeah, perhaps if you can give us a little bit more indication of what reason you're looking at it for. But yeah, if we're looking at transmission of fault current, or determining whether we can have a TT installation, for example, then that would be worth having a look at. But yeah, please come back and give us a little bit more information, or the angle that you're looking at that from. Okay, let's have a look what else we've got. Same thing, let's have a cable installed under thermal insulation, less than 100 millimeters, as you might come across in the domestic when you have a sub-main from a fuse board. So yeah, we did we looked at some of that. Please do bear in mind that there's a table specifically for twin and earth when installed under thermal insulation greater than 100 mil, and it has quite a dramatic effect on its current carrying capacity. So where, I think the example we looked at last week was 2.5 mil conductors, and it takes the current carrying capacity of those down from 27 amp to 17 amp. So you would need to get information from the cable manufacturer if we're looking at SWA, because again that's sort of not seen as a common enough installation method for it to be included in 7671. But you've got to be looking at something roughly like the same ratio in terms of the detrimental effect that's going to have on its current carrying capacity. So we've got a follow-up question about the swimming pool. I was asking whether the supplementary bonding around the pool was in addition to the extraneous conductive parts being main protective bonding to if outside. So again, yeah, we've got to think about, are those extraneous conductive parts simultaneously accessible with another extraneous conductive part or another exposed conductive part? Because as we talked about right at the beginning of the question and answer session today, if they're not, then although it may be an extraneous conductive part, we wouldn't consider it in terms of requiring bonding. But if it's then simultaneously accessible, then you would need to main bond it and provide supplementary bonding locally in the swimming pool. So again, first of all, determine whether it is an extraneous conductive part, and as well as your physical measurements, you've also got to look at, is it simultaneously accessible with another conductive part, exposed or extraneous? Because if it's not, if for want of a better phrase, electrically isolated from everything else, so you can't simultaneously access it, then we wouldn't consider it extraneous. We'd consider it a conductive part, but it's not liable to introduce a potential if it can't be simultaneously accessed with another exposed or extraneous conductive part. Let's have a look. So let's have a look. BS 7671 contains rules, 121 for design, erection and certification of electrical installations to provide safety and proper functioning. Why on an EICR do we not code items that do not comply with BS 7671, especially if it was installed to the current standards? Surely everything is BS 7671 is there for safety reasons. Okay, so this is a very valid point, and it was something that we talked about in a webinar that we did on coding classifications, where we looked at there were some specific examples of things which purely weren't BS 7671 compliant, and I think the example we used was a switch drop where the switch wire in a twin and earth cable hadn't been sleeved brown to indicate that it was a line conductor. So that's clearly non-compliant with 7671, and if we were installing it as that, we wouldn't be able to tick our scheduled inspections to confirm that we'd identified conductors correctly. But a condition report is very different. If you look at in section 6 about what's the requirements of a condition report, the very last ident in the list of things which its purpose is covered under talks about we're only interested in non-compliances with 7671 which may lead to danger. So the tick on a schedule of inspections for a condition report has a very, very different meaning to the tick on an installation certificate. And if I use that example, no, the switch wire isn't sleeved properly, but on the basis that it's terminated within a plastic enclosure and that enclosure is sealed, we don't see that as providing potential danger to the users of the installation. And that's what we're looking at in a condition report. We're not looking at just compliance with 7671. We're looking at areas where it's non-compliant with 7671 which might lead to danger. So it's one of those situations where if it's not compliant with 7671, we would definitely say, oh, who installed that? I wouldn't do that. It's not right. But ultimately, if it's not unsafe for the users of the installation, then we wouldn't record it as a danger. So that's I think that's a good example where we'd actually not be able to tick it on an installation certificate if it wasn't correctly identified and we were installing, but we would be able to tick it if we were testing an existing installation where it was absent. So I think that's the difference, and it's a key fundamental difference of the purpose of a condition report versus the purpose of an installation certificate. An installation certificate is confirming compliance with 7671. A condition report is confirming safety for continued use. But would you add anything to that, Dan?
I think you make a good point. With these scheduled items inspected, you're looking at do those items give rise to danger? I suppose the best way that I sort of simplify in my head, and it's yes or no, isn't it? And obviously you do your codes, you can attribute your codes accordingly. I mean, that said, it is your ICR, and if say a contractor put a code C3 for it, it's not that I would have a major concern about, because it doesn't affect the overall outcome of the report. But if it was getting to the point of where he or she is given the incorrect outcome of an EICR, then I've got an issue with it. But no, you're totally right there, Sam. I think there are some items that we don't code, but because you have to think about their impact, and you think in a switch shop, it's behind, it's enclosed. People that should take it off should be competent to do so as well, so they should be able to test it and verify it first and work safely as well. Yeah. So no, I think you cover that well, Sam.
Okay, we'll try and finish off these last few. Hi, regards EV installation. DNO main cutout fuse 60 amp. DNO say have to pay for an upgrade to 80 or 100 amp. Would using load limiting via EV charger be acceptable if customer does not want to upgrade main cutout as recommended? So yeah, difficult situation, but totally can see where that's coming from. Yeah, you could do. Ultimately, you've got to make your estimation of maximum demand, either through measurement or calculation, with your knowledge of the installation. So yeah, if we are allowed to use the intelligence that often EV chargers have now in determining maximum demand, in that they'll do that load limiting. They'll make sure that they only actually feed the vehicle charger when there's current available, and even when there's current available, they may not feed it at its maximum load, i.e. 32 amp for a fast charger. So yeah, that would be perfectly acceptable. I think it's a conversation to have between the DNO and the customer. Find out how much it would cost to upgrade, because it all depends on whether it's just the service head or whether it is actually cables in the road, depending upon where the location is. But if it's still 60, I'm guessing it's quite rural, and so it might be the actual cables in the road. But yeah, it's probably worth getting some estimates and then explaining to the homeowner what the advantages of upgrading would be, because in future they might be going further. They might be going ground source heat pump, they might be going electric boiler, so they could be increasing the current demand on the installation, in which case your load sharing will help with your vehicle charger now, but won't help with those other things in the future. So perhaps have a think about what else is planned for the installation and compare that with the cost for the DNO to upgrade. Another one, stranded cable. BS7671 said they should be suitably terminated. What to your knowledge would this mean? Does it mean twisting together and doubling back, or using ferrules? It's normally, so if we're talking about fine stranded cable, this is normally where we've got fine cables which could be damaged through using traditional screw terminals. So we'd be looking at crimped ferrules, something that would be a manufacturer's recommendation in terms of ensuring that we're not actually going to damage the cable, because that's the potential danger, in that you've got the harmful or the harsh effect of a screw terminal, which could actually break strands on a fine stranded cable, and then you're finding that then you've lost strands, so now you've got a reduced current carrying capacity and maybe even a poor durable mechanical connection, because those strands have broken under duress. So yeah, that's what that's really referring to. So yeah, our old days of making sure we twist and double back was on larger stranded cables, at the bottom end of twin and earth, but the fine strands tend to be much smaller.
Also, Sam,
yep.
Well, with bootlace ferrules as well, do a lot of control panel building in my sort of past experience, don't get confused as well with the colour codes, because you get French and German colour codes, and sometimes red, for example, means a different size. So if you find like ferrules lying about and they're like red or blue, don't assume they're a certain size, because different colour codes do have different sizes as well with the bootlace ferrules. But as I think what I was going to add to that, Sam, is, as you said, manufacturer instructions will often prevail with that. But I think the ferrules have got a purpose. They're there to design, as you say. The strands are very, very fine, and they can be damaged by, and they can break by traditional methods. So by containing in that bootlace ferrule, it just provides a better, more mechanically sound connection, really, to those cables.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we'll finish it off tonight with how high off the floor or above a worktop should a socket outlet be installed? So what's your thoughts on that? Because there's no height in 7671, is there?
No, there isn't. I think it's often a lot of people think that there still is particular height. So I often get asked, how far can I run this? How, what's distances? And there are very few. I mean, you got the approved documents, the building regulations. They've part in, for example, for new dwellings that will specify heights to accessibility. We would recommend 100mm minimum from the bottom of the actual socket outlet itself or finished floor surface, purely because what we're looking at from BSN 71 point of view is, I think you got regulation 55316, which refers to minimising the risk of mechanical damage to the actual socket outlet and the associated plug and its cable. So this is what we're really thinking about. If it's too low, you've got to think about the user. Is it usable? Can they use it? Can they put the plug in and out without damage, without causing excess stress on that cable, that plug connection, or even on the pins of the socket outlet? Because then you've got a plug which is trying to put an angle, you can be damaging internally as well. That leads to loose terminals, equals to overheating, etc. So instead of that goes. So so you have to think about consideration definitely to how high you do put it above the floor because of these constraints.
Yeah, and that's all we're really concerned about, isn't it? Ensuring that there's no stress on the cable, there's no stress on the plug, which could create an unsafe or potentially dangerous situation. So yeah, and like you say, general guidance, 100mm above work surfaces, it normally meets that. But again, it's one of those things, while you're there, ask, what do you plug into that? Let's see, is there any stress on the cable? Is there any stress on the plug? So yeah, one of those situations where there's no dimension actually given in 7671, but there's plenty of requirements that says it must be safe for continued use. So that's what we'd be looking at. Okay, well again, lots of great questions. Thanks very much for those people that did put questions in. If we didn't get round to your question, we'll take on it. Certainly. The question about soil resistivity, we'll have to have a look at if the person who put that in wants to actually fire anything to the helpline over the next week. We'll certainly try and look at that. But yeah, another good evening. Always good to talk to you, Dan. Did you enjoy that?
Love it, honestly, Sam. It's always a pleasure working with you anyway. So I absolutely loved it. I was going to say, add one more thing, if that's okay. When I've got a few questions regarding reference methods to twin cabling, there's actually another really, really good article in our Connections Summer 2009 edition on page 45, which goes in quite detail of the impact of insulation methods on current carrying capacity for flat twin earth cable. So yeah, the Connections Summer 2009 has actually got a really good article on that for those that are interested. So
no, it's really good. Okay, and so as I say, we'll trawl all the question banks again just to make sure that we did pick them up from everybody, and if we didn't, we'll try and start off with that one for next week. Somebody's very kindly, which I think is a great way to end the night, somebody's very kindly put on the soil resistivity, you'll have to do some digging. So yes, very good point, well made. So yeah, that's a great one. I just want to remind people we do have another wire webinar in the series this Wednesday coming. So this Wednesday coming, it will be on electric vehicle charging. So it's all around Amendment 1, all around the general rules and functionality required around vehicle charging, and that marries up with the articles in our Current Connections magazine, which again are also around vehicle charging. So if you haven't already, please go on to the website and register for that. You'll be able to watch it live starting at 8 o'clock on Wednesday night, or if you can't make that, you'll always be able to view it on demand at a time that better suits you. So without further ado, thanks very, very much, and hopefully we'll see you again on Wednesday. Well, one thing I should say, just that there won't be a Facebook Live next Monday night because of a holiday. So we'll be back with Facebook Lives in a fortnight. So please make sure you join in then. And as I say, there is a wire this Wednesday, which is the last Wednesday wire before we break for a shut in August. So yeah, as I say, if you haven't already registered for that, please do so. Okay, so from me it's good night, and from Dan,
good evening all. Thank you very much for joining us.
Okay, thank you very much.
Take care. See ya.